let's just go ahead and kick it off with questions. Any questions at all?
I've not heard your little speech. I'd
haven't?
love to hear you.
Okay, that's
I
great.
have not been to any of your events, so
Okay.
I would love to hear what you have to say.
Okay.
That's why I'm here, is to hear what you have to say.
Perfect, you got it. So I entered this race because really there's a number of issues of why I wanted to run, why I decided to run. Issues that extend beyond just a few things that I'm gonna mention right here. But it led into me creating this platform, which is land, livelihoods, and legacy. So 3 core tenets to the platform. The last straw for me was the industrial wind and solar complexes that were being proposed very heavily down in Lincoln County and kind of around our area. And quite frankly, when I learned that one of the project boundaries for those wind turbine complexes was just 2 or 3 miles north of my property, I got a little bit more interested. And that's, when it comes knocking on your back door or your front door a little bit, you kind of perk up a little bit. So that was kind of the final straw for me. I started to do a little more research into that industry, started to understand a little bit better, and I don't want anything to do with it, and I don't think it deserves a room and a place here in our district. So that, along with the human manure, biosolid sludge issue, which I believe is incredibly disgusting. It's, there's a huge property and land issue that we're facing with those 2 items, which I believe is impacting our everyday way of life. And I can now attest and affirm personally that human or biosolid and sludge issue, there's been a dump site about 2.5 miles south of my home and my property, which I'll tell you what, if you step outside even with just a little bit of a south breeze, it'll hit you like a ton of bricks. So I've had the privilege, I guess you could say, of being directly impacted by that over the last few weeks, which has even more reinforced my opposition to it. So that's in the land category, which ultimately I think is impacting our way of life and the way that we want to live a peaceful, rural, quiet way of life. I mean, that's a lot of the reasons why we all live here, grew up here, moved out here. And on top of that, something that's causing our day-to-day to be even more challenging is simply the tax burden and just the overall nature of government trying to look at a problem and solve a problem with more money. And they throw money at every problem that they can, and quite frankly, that's our money. And I don't believe that we have the right processes in place and the right confidence in place to know that our taxpayer money is getting the proper return on investment. So I've got a framework and a plan to make sure that we get some transparency, accountability, and oversight with all of our taxpayer dollars, okay? So there's that. I mean, there's a whole host of other issues and areas of opportunity and challenges that we can overcome, whether that's public education, whether that's immigration, whether any number of things that I've talked about at length before. But at the end of the day, that's an everyday way of life that we're currently challenged with, which transitions into the legacy and the future generations. That is my main motivation of why I'm doing this, and it's those 2 girls back there. I know we inherently want to leave our home in our area and our county or our district in a better place for our children and grandchildren. And I believe that we're on a path right now that is making that a little more challenging, a little more difficult. But I also think that we've gotten to this point because we've allowed legislation or inaction by legislators that have put us in this position. So I believe course correction is possible, but I believe true, honest, conservative, servant-oriented leadership is what we need to kind of get that course correction started. So that's my reasons for running, the things that are important to me. I've talked to thousands upon thousands of people, either at the door, at events like this, invited into their homes, and those things that have been important to me and the reasons for me running have been overwhelmingly reciprocated by people that I've talked to. So I've been super blessed and thankful to meet as many people as I have, and for the things that are important to me to likewise be important to people out here. So.
Could you expound a little bit more on the biosludge? What can we do to help prevent that? Because we do have a neighbor that does that.
Right. Well, quite frankly, I don't think it deserves to be used at all. I believe there's 3 or 4 different methods in which you can dispose of municipal waste like that, and the EPA is promoting the primary method as being that of fertilizer use on farmland, which I'm vehemently against. There's other practices and other other alternatives to that I think maybe, we should be looking at instead. And I don't believe that the scrutiny that's currently in place of how this is being cleaned and treated and supposedly safe for the land or for the environment that's being spread on is working. I believe there's way too many other contaminants and chemicals and everything else that are still prevalent in that at the end of the day when it gets poured out, which is unacceptable. So in my mind, it needs to go away entirely. At minimum, there needs to be a significant amount of scrutiny applied to the process and how it's treated.
And so right now, there are no regulations on it, is that what I'm hearing you say?
No, there are regulations, I'm saying they're unsatisfactory.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So what are your ideas for solutions for that? Not only that, but something else to replace that?
Right, so obviously the fertilizer cost is the huge, offset there that farmers are struggling with. I mean, to the extent that there are plans that we can put in place to help alleviate that burden and come up with a policy as a state to help provide support and incentives and whatever that may be for farmers to have access to fertilizer, legitimate, better fertilizer than using that as an alternative, I'm all ears. And that's where my whole process, when I meet with people, when I have these conversations, I'm not gonna ever pretend to be an expert on anything. There's people that live this every single day and have lived it for a long time, and I wanna lean into that expertise, and I wanna partner with people. Because that's what I feel like this position is it is really a partnership. It's really me serving you all. At the end of the day, you all are putting some trust in me to go represent you at the Capitol, so I want that to be a two-way street and a partnership. So I would love to hear feedback and hear ideas as well.
I have a question on, do you know how they're, in the areas that have been contaminated, have you heard any ways that they're cleaning them up? Because I just found out yesterday, on Highway 177, just north of the Turner Turnpike, in that low land there, they had been spreading it, for a couple of years, and apparently they had to go in and they burnt all that hay that was baled.
Okay.
And apparently they burnt last year's and this year's, but that tells me that land is contaminated. And that's right along the Deep Fork River. It borders it, and that area floods about every 3 years. It completely covers that area deep.
Right.
And so the areas, I know that I'm affected by it because we have had it near us, and I know that there are some other people that live by Mr. Wallace that now have some severe health issues. And so, to me, one of the biggest things is getting that stopped as soon as possible. I know
Sure.
There's other places that have stopped it.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
do you know anything about the cleanup or how they're doing any of that, or is it safe to burn it?
Quite honestly, I haven't researched as much on that end of it, of how do you reclaim or kind of go through this process of trying to reclaim that ground and that land back to and restore it back to where it was before. I do know it's been proven that once those chemicals exist on properties like that, it's significantly difficult to get them out of that property. I mean, you're talking years to decades to potentially centuries for that stuff to stay in the ground. So the practices by which they could clean it, or if those practices have been studied and the effectiveness of that, I'm honestly not sure. But we should be starting to do some investigation of that, because obviously it's been in practice for a while, right? And it is currently legal in the state of Oklahoma, right? So there's certainly a significant footprint that has had already. So the cleaning practices would be something to look into.
Do you know
for
how
sure.
many counties in Oklahoma you allow it?
I don't. No, I mean it's a statewide, yeah.
Oh,
But
how long have you lived out here?
how long have I lived out here? Right around 3.5 years. Prior to,
Where'd you grow up at?
I grew up in Oklahoma City, so I was born and raised in Oklahoma City, went to school at Oklahoma State, and Stillwater School further north. That's where my wife and I met. And then most recently, prior to moving to Chandler into Lincoln County, we were just a little bit further down 66 in Arcadia, had a small acreage in Arcadia.
And where's your place at now?
Just north of the casino, a couple miles off 66.
What have you done for a living up to now?
So I've been in oil and gas for 20 years. First part of that, kind of the first half of that was at Chesapeake Energy, worked for them in Oklahoma City. The last half, I spent about 10 years where I had a software and services business in oil and gas. and operated that and sold that a couple of years ago. For the last 2 years, I've been working for that same company that bought us out to help transition the business and employees and everything else into that larger software company. My last day in my position was a couple of days ago, earlier this week.
I'll give you an example about the contamination. Just a mile north of where we live, there is 40 acres that has been, the last 3 years has been spread upon, I should say.
Right.
I found out last week through the guy that does the baling for this lady that they're going to have to dispose of the Johnson grass that's on the field
Okay.
because it is poisoned.
Okay. And did they get?
And they haven't done anything yet to get rid of it.
Okay.
But what they're gonna have to do, the way I understood it, they were gonna have to mow it, rake it, and pile it up and burn it.
Okay. It's good to know. It's good to know.
So did you go to OSU or just went to school at Stillwater?
I went to OSU. Yeah.
And your degree is in what?
Finance with a minor in accounting.
You worked in oil and gas, but you never worked in agriculture?
No, sir. Never employed in agriculture. No.
But you have
Have you ever-
farm animals.
So this is the first time the daughters that went to a rural school?
So we actually homeschool. We chose to homeschool years ago when we first had our oldest out in Arcadia. And that was a choice that we honestly felt led from the Lord to do at that time. That would have been a much larger school district out in the Edmond area. And my wife grew up in the middle of the country and graduated with 20 kids. And so having or the concept of going to a really large school for our children wasn't something that we desired. So we opted to homeschool at that point.
But they're not going to Wellston or Chandler, they're homeschooled now?
Correct. When we moved out there, we decided to continue the homeschool practice because we believe in the way that these girls are being educated, and they've been doing great. So we continued that path.
How many employees did you have?
Prior to selling the business, we were right around 100 employees whenever we sold. When I joined in 2012, the gentleman that had founded the business was my boss prior at Chesapeake. He had about a handful of contract employees at the time. And
What was the name of the company?
Land Information Services. The product name was Land Vantage, so you can find material by either of those names online. We were 100% oil and gas customer base. And the company that we sold to was 100% oil and gas customer base at the time. And then they acquired about a handful of renewables customers over the last 12 months. Not my company, not my decision, not my strategy. And, but that's a handful of companies out of 2,000 that they've got on their portfolio today.
So at the company, were you in software, were you in leasing?
Software, not leasing. No, we do not go out and take oil and gas leases or renewables leases. We don't do that front office lease negotiation work. We don't do any construction development or anything like that. I say we, the business, before, no, it's purely software. That's all it is.
You gonna put your kids in school out here, in small rural schools?
And I've admitted to people, if we would have had our children out here in our rural area, if we were out here when we had our children, we probably would have looked at that potentially a little bit differently. But at the moment, we're very settled and confident with the homeschool program that we're doing, and we love the growth that our kids have had and what have you. So, and that's not to discredit the importance and the significance of public schools.
My
Right?
point being, our little schools out here are struggling.
Right.
And
I
we
understand.
got nobody that has experience with the little small rural schools.
Okay.
And I'm trying to see how you moving from the city and homeschooling your kids is gonna be a benefit to my kids that are going to small schools and my grandkids. You know?
Okay.
They're dying on the vine.
Right. So I can appreciate that and that perception. I will tell you though, I have told everybody that I've talked to, I 100% recognize the importance of our public education. It has to be there. It needs to be improved. There's a lot of areas that need to be improved. my wife and I went to public school growing up, so it's not like we're 100% homeschool all the way from us growing up. I mean, I understand the importance of public education. And, you know, to me, in my mind, the first significant step that we can make is pouring a greater percentage of the budget for public education directly into the teachers and into the classroom. That's the biggest impact that you can have, is with the teachers in the classroom, getting those kids and getting back to basics. And you know, a lot of the issues, a lot of the publicity around issues with public education, there's a lot of stigmas on the inner city, you know, the larger city school systems, that those issues are not as prevalent in our rural school districts. And I know that. I've talked to tons of teachers out here and met with a number of them. And so I know that the challenges and the issues are sometimes quite different rural to city. And so I would love to learn more from teachers and administrators out here on how I can be a greater support and a bigger voice for rural school districts at the capital, so it's not predominantly and dominated by city issues.
As a history teacher, you know, there's a lot of publicity going around with Walter's, you know, wanting teachers to teach the Bible
Right.
in the classroom, which I think kind of how it's been publicized is a bit misconstrued on his point. I want to know your take on that.
Yeah. So, you know, as a strong believer in Jesus Christ and being a Christian myself, I am certainly in favor of children being exposed to the Bible. And if we think about it from what I believe the intent is with the Bible in the school, and what Walters is pushing for, is for the historical nature and context of how that Bible was used in the foundation of our country, right? So from that perspective, I'm on board with that. It's not meant to proselytize or evangelize the children in the school, right? I would love to see, I say all that to say I would love to see a stronger and tighter framework of how it's going to be used in the actual like curriculum of this is how the Bible's going to be used in the history classes and things like that. I would love to see, you know, the details behind that, but in general, I'm certainly in favor of it. Yes, ma'am.
So our farm is one of the farms that is potentially impacted by human earth surrounding us. In Maine, they're now telling those farmers they're contaminated with something called forever chemicals, and it's only good for solar, and they can't grow food on it anymore. So we had 3 bills with Senator Shane Jett. One of them would have helped, it would have actually made them regulate the forever chemicals in the sludge. I was told by another House representative that nothing would be done with our bills, and that as long as another representative is in House, nothing will be done to regulate sludge. If you're elected, will you work with other representatives and help get those bills through to protect farmers and ranchers?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a top reason why I'm in this race. I mean, there may have been some final straws for me, but I've known about the human error sludge issue for years, and I understand the significant impact that it has, the negative impact that it has. So I'm absolutely willing to work with other people down there that have been supportive of it today and see if we can make some progress on that for sure. I thought you were your hand.
I have something.
Yes.
Your opponent has been a huge champion for public schools. And I know that he, you know, there's been a lot of things that he's done for teachers, pay raises, things
Right.
like that.
Right.
Right now, there's a lot of fear with teachers. You know, if, you know, Donald Trump talks about, once he's elected, maybe doing away with the Department of Education altogether. And then even within our state, Ryan Walters, you know, has, and I don't disagree with these people necessarily, but, you know, talked about refusing federal funding. So I just recently resigned as principal of an elementary school and took a different position, but, it's terrifying to me to think about all that we would lose without federal funding. That's all of our special education, that's our low income programs, that's our most vulnerable students would be hugely affected by that. So what would you recommend doing? And I know you talk a lot about tax cuts, and that sometimes affects education funding. So I'm really interested in kind of how you would balance that, because we're gonna need more funding
Right.
to compensate for what we're not getting federally, so.
And quite frankly, that's something that I haven't seen from Walters is if you're gonna remove the funding from the federal level, how are you gonna counter that, right? I haven't seen him line that out, and if he has, I would love to see it. So for me personally, yes, I mean, I talked about tax cuts. I've more so leaned into what I believe to be a huge amount of waste of taxpayer money. So I believe that if we lean in and we run audits and performance audits and make sure that taxpayer money is being used efficiently and correctly for its intended purpose, I think there's a significant amount of waste through the different institutions and agencies that are taking taxpayer money.
So you think that waste is from the top or like on the local level? Where are you wanting those audits to be, like auditing independent school districts or what?
Well, and so I wasn't specifically referring to school districts, I was just referring to anybody that takes taxpayer money. Just leaning towards and moving towards, when we find all of this waste, we'll have excess funds that are currently there that are being wasted that we can recoup and then redeploy to education or to other areas that need that additional funding to be effective.
So what specifically though are you, like what do you, I'm not fully understanding. I feel like that's kind of a general answer and I don't mean any disrespect.
No,
but,
that's okay.
like I want specifically.
So specifically
Just,
what,
like,
yeah.
Who do we need to audit? Where's the money? Where are we gonna get the money?
I'm being indiscriminate on who gets audited. If you take taxpayer money, you're already getting financially audited by requirements with the state today, and that's just to make sure that the accounting makes sense.
So in addition to all
So
the
in addition to
agencies that are audited already, are you going to do?
Additional audits,
More
which I'm calling performance
okay.
audits. Performance audits is, are you using the money for its intended purpose, and are you using it efficiently? Meaning, if you went and spent $1 million on equipment or goods or services, was that $1 million spent efficiently, or were you actually acquiring a $500,000 value for $1 million? Okay, that's what I'm talking about, and I mean across the board. So if you take taxpayer money, there needs to be greater transparency in how that money is being used to make sure that we're getting a return on investment. So with that, I believe the additional funds that we're gonna find that are currently being squandered away because people are not being efficient with taxpayer money, we can then redeploy into public education and into other areas where that can be more effective. Because I 100% agree with you, the idea of public education going away is not an okay concept for
I don't
anybody to
wanna
latch
live in
onto.
a society that
Absolutely
doesn't have
not.
it, yeah.
And it's currently in our state constitution that public education has to exist, and it exists for a good reason. And so I am not against public education whatsoever. Just because we personally choose not to send our girls doesn't mean that I don't understand the value and the significance that it plays in our society for our children to grow up, for them to go through that education system and become productive members in the workforce here in the state of Oklahoma, not having to relocate elsewhere for good jobs.
Yeah, well, that kind of brings up another point. I 100% support your decision to homeschool your children. We have a lot of families that do a very successful job in our district. However, working in a public school, I've seen a lot of cases where if a family is turned in for child abuse, or even just truancy or whatever, they will remove their child from public education and claim to homeschool. And then there's no one's following that child. Do you have any thoughts on how we can protect children from that? It's not a huge problem, but it is a problem every year we see it.
Right.
You know, especially for someone who's under investigation for child abuse, like can we at least have something in place where they can't homeschool their children?
Right.
And, you know, there's no eyes on those children and
Right.
so what are your thoughts about even some minimal regulations on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, always at the top of the list with anything that we do, health and safety needs to be paramount, period. And especially with children, with elderly, with people that are ill-equipped to really defend themselves. I think there needs to be a greater amount of protection for those individuals and for the kids. As far as policy to kind of monitor the children and try to, you know, stay up with what's going on in the family, I honestly don't have a good answer for that, because I know that, you know, then we can start talking about unnecessary overreach into the family. However, if that family is dysfunctional and you have somebody that's breaking the law that is being investigated for child abuse, then I think that does cross the line where the safety of that child needs to be top priority.
Can we go to
what?
raise our hand for
Sure.
questions, kind of like
Sure.
public school?
Yeah,
So we don't
we
dominate?
can do that. But I honestly don't have a good answer for that right now, on what that policy or what that would look like.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Wouldn't that be more of a DHS issue anyways?
It would be,
Yeah.
it would be, certainly would fall under, I think, the guidelines of DHS. But yeah,
But of course, the teachers.
Let's raise our hand.
it's okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The teachers would be the ones that would see that.
Right, understood, they would have kind of the hands-on and see that first and foremost, so, I understand that, for sure. Yes,
Go ahead, did you have one?
no, she was raising.
Representative Kevin Wallace had a bill, SB 1071, that gave $10 million to hydrogen. And that bill was then flipped at the last minute to a bill about gun rebates. I'm wondering, hydrogen, I found out, is to power, it has to be powered by green energy, solar and wind. And then it has to have carbon dioxide sequestration, which then is injected underground and puts our aquifers at risk. So if you're elected, what will you do? Will you reignite that $10 million of our money that's gonna go to hydrogen, that's gonna fund green energy?
So, two issues. Number one, it's part of this green energy agenda, which I believe is a leftist liberal agenda that's being shoved down from the federal level and being adopted by the states and being continued here within our state. So I'm against the green energy agenda, first and foremost. Secondly, we're talking about tax incentives for corporations to be here, whether that's the hydrogen bill, whether it's the solar manufacturing plant in Inola, whether it's any other number of things. When we incentivize corporations to be here, or we have to incentivize corporations to be here with tax write-offs and with tax incentives, that's completely backwards. We should have an environment here in the state of Oklahoma where the regulatory environment and the overall tax environment and climate is desirable for those companies to be here on their own. Because when we start doing those tax incentives and saying, well, we'll write all that off, you get into different municipalities in different areas getting into a bidding war of, well, we want that in our town, well, we want that in our town, and so that just drives the price up on what that tax offset's gonna be. And at the end of the day, the local people in that area are gonna be holding the bag on what the overall impact is to the economy and to that environment around there. So I am not for promoting significant tax incentives for corporations to be here. We need to change the way we do business so they wanna be here on their own. Yes, sir.
So, if I understand right, you said you moved out here 2 years ago? Is that about right?
3.5.
3.5 years?
Sold my business 2 years ago.
And what do you do for a living now?
Well, I just stepped away from my position about 2 days ago on Wednesday at the end of the month. So right now, Lord willing, I'm gonna be able to focus 100% of my time on being your next representative.
Do you have any experience in politics?
No, I do not.
Thank God.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
She had brought up the aquifer when I was doing the research because they're trying to put the turbines in our area. And I don't know if you're aware that there have been 203 earthquakes in right east and southeast of Kearney alone, right where my farm is located. Within 9 years, there's been 203, with 65 just in 2023. The towns that are only 3 miles away only had like 6 or 7 within that 9-year period. So apparently we're in a fault line, and I have tried to address and ask, Apex is the one that's wanting to put the wind turbines in where we're at, because when I did my research, it said that if you should not put turbines anywhere there is an active fault line.
Okay.
And if you do, they must be special ones that are built specifically to withstand earthquakes.
Sure.
I asked Apex if they were willing to do that. Of course, he, didn't say much, but when I started looking into that, because we had 11 earthquakes just a quarter mile from our house.
Right.
And there's arsenic in our water, in our Garber Wellington water, and I was diagnosed with lupus and had a huge amount of arsenic in my system.
Right.
That's what prompted me to look into the earthquakes. What I found out when I contacted the Department of Water Science is that they have not been monitoring this Garber Wellington aquifer for 10 years.
Okay.
Because I wanted to know how these different earthquakes were affecting it.
Right.
And they said it's not being monitored for the last 10 years.
Okay.
That is something I think, because there are so many, even though we're right on the edge of it,
Right.
there's a huge amount of people that's not being monitored while all this stuff is being dumped.
Right.
I would like to see that somebody check into that and that be something that, because it could affect all of us.
Sure, yeah, no, the aquifer and those fault lines are certainly something that, whatever industry it may be, right? I mean, it could be wind turbines, it could be oil and gas wells, right? So the OCC has already put regulations. Right, or the human, I mean, OCC has regulated the oil and gas industry to make sure that their drilling and injection practices aren't gonna compromise fault lines, and, you know, because there was all of that in the news years ago about that potentially being a catalyst for you know, earthquakes and what have you. And so certainly, you know, as things come up, there needs to be a fresh look at what the regulations are in place, and do we need tighter or additional regulations or what have you? So
Yeah, cause we're not getting
certainly
any help
important.
or answers out of the Department of the DEQ.
DEQ,
They're
yeah.
not cooperating or helping
Yeah.
at all. We did have extensive water testing done. I'm still trying to figure it all out.
Okay.
But I do know that hexavalent chromium, we are above the normal levels of that.
Okay.
That's what Aaron Brockovich, that whole movie was about, hexavalent chromium.
Vaccine sludge.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
okay.
I have had, when I look at the symptoms that I currently have, I have 17 symptoms of toxicity from chromium and arsenic alone, and I have
Right.
3 autoimmune diseases
Right.
that have started since 2016. I found a lot of people in my area that have developed those diseases since 2016.
Right.
That's when Wallace started putting the humanure
Okay.
on his area, and it started moving into our areas.
Right.
So
So I
that's
would-
why it really concerns
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, I would definitely like to talk to DEQ and certainly work with them on, hey, what are we currently doing? What could we be doing better or more? And try to see if we can come up with some additional things to do from a DEQ perspective. Other questions? Yes, sir.
First, Mr. Shaw, thanks for running. I appreciate the democratic process and for you to put your name on the ballot. It truly means a lot, and it takes a lot of intestinal fortitude to be able to do that, so thank you. Back to education. You would have to withstand tremendous amount of questions from superintendents and educators and teachers from public schools, considering you have chose to raise your kids in homeschooling, which I think is a personal choice. But I'm curious about how are you going to answer questions such as 4-day school weeks, the tremendous amount of virtual school education that's continuing to go on, as well as the balance between local control among school boards relative to the state and the state legislature. So I'm curious about those questions and answers and how you're going to be able to dictate policy to have positive impacts.
Yeah, and you know, kind of boiling back to what I talked about earlier, I want to come from a position of being truly inquisitive with them. I mean, you all tell me what you believe to be the best way forward, the best policy forward, and let's talk about it. So I always want it to be an open dialogue. I don't ever want it to be what am I going to unilaterally do or what have you. You know, because they're going to know best. I mean, they do that for a living. They do that every single day, and I want to lean into that expertise. But certainly, you know, when we talk about control from, you know, a state level to a school district level or what have you, I mean, if you liken it to federal control versus state control, I mean, I'm certainly in favor of the majority of policy and decisions being done by those that are actually living and breathing it on the ground, and not from somebody else that's, you know, quite a few miles away and may not have the intimacy of what's going on every single day. So I'm certainly in favor of there being some guardrails in place from a state perspective, and then within those guardrails, I mean, let's let the school districts, you know, decide what's best for their location and for their schools and for their students. Because we know that you could even be in different parts of the city, let alone city to rural, and you're, again, back to, you know, what I said earlier, the needs can be entirely different. So I certainly would like to see the school districts take more ownership of those decisions. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of going back to the wind turbine, I grew up in western Oklahoma where I watched the wind turbines go up there, and I kind of saw how it affected affected farmers. You know, they're claiming, scientifically that it is affecting the sterilization of cattle.
Yep.
What is your plan to fight against that? You talked about that you're against it, but I don't really know what you plan on doing when you get up there.
On the wind turbine specifically.
Yes.
So, my plan going forward is, I would love to see us just put a pause on any new construction. Call it a
There you
moratorium,
go.
call it what you want. Any new construction going forward, let's put a pause, let's get some research and some studies done by qualified, independent, third-party people that we can rely and trust upon, and then present that back to the legislative body and to the state here. So we can have what I believe we're gonna come to the consensus of what those findings are, is that it's not beneficial for our communities and for our state.
True.
So my first and foremost push is gonna be to put a pause on it, right? And then from there, I believe there needs to be the same level of respect in setback distances that are currently applied to schools, hospitals, and airports, which is 1.5 miles. If the airports is an obvious thing, right? But if we look at 1.5 miles from a school and a hospital, there's a clear health and safety impact to individuals, to humans, right? I know that there's impacts to livestock and everything else that have been studied. But that same 1.5 miles respect needs to be applied to any occupied structure. The current setbacks that are kind of self-imposed by the companies, whether it's Apex or what have you, is generally 1,200 feet, and that's nowhere close to being enough. So moratorium or pause. Absent that, or if that lifts, then we go to extremely reasonable and realistic setbacks to keep everybody safe.
Yeah, if you travel to western Oklahoma,
They're everywhere.
they're right up against the road. They don't have even that 1,250 feet.
Right.
There is so much that's gone on with this green energy baloney.
Yeah.
It cannot even support, you couldn't run your house off of a field of wind turbines.
Well, and that's where, fundamentally, when you look at it from an economic perspective, that they don't exist without our taxpayer money.
Oh,
And so,
exactly right.
whether it's green
100%.
energy, whether it's any other institution, if we fully prop up an industry that can never support itself, there's never a point in time in which they can be self-sufficient, it doesn't make sense.
Well, and they cost more to make than they bring in,
Right.
and they would use more energy, fossil fuel energy, to be made.
Right.
So it's
Is that
Yes.
state funds, is that
ridiculous.
state funds also the federal funds that funds
So the state funding kind of ran out, so there was some state tax incentives for the green energy, but the bucket of funds for that was depleted, and that is no more. So, and from my understanding, there are no more state dollars going to green energy. It's federal dollars from what we're looking at here in Oklahoma. But there was a significant amount of taxpayer money and state funds that was used to support it for a period of time. Yes, sir, I'm sorry.
if you're elected and they throw a bunch of money at you, would you change your mind?
No, sir. My morals and my beliefs are not for sale, honestly. I would love to partner with constituents and with people that have the same principles and morals and beliefs that we all have out here. But I'm never gonna compromise on my morals and my beliefs and the true representation of the people in District 32. There's no amount of money that'll change that. Yes, sir.
Now, on the topic of funds, so you have quite a bit of personal funds into this.
Yes,
mean,
I have.
One that you typically don't see specifically for a house race. Is this a one-shot situation, or if you're unsuccessful, is there another bid in 2 years or another public office that you wish to see? What is the future if this doesn't work out?
Good question, and I've been asked that from some other people before. The answer, quite honestly, at this moment in time is, I don't know. So, I truly entered this race because I felt led from the Lord to do it, and I believe I'm convicted that he led me into this for this point in time and for this race. If this doesn't come to fruition, it's gonna be still up to him on what happens next, so, and I'm not gonna predict that or suggest that I know how that's gonna turn out. But yeah, you're right, I mean, my family and I have been very blessed, and, we've been able to support a lot of the finances for our campaign, and I'm not shy about that or ashamed of that, but, yes, ma'am.
So to date, you have recorded $160,000 that you loaned yourself, and I'm sure you spent more. How do you intend to pay the loan back?
So the way that process works, and from my understanding is, as I get into office, if there's additional donations and things like that that can offset that loan over time, that's great. But there's an extra $20,000.
Where would you accept those donations from to pay yourself back?
I'm not gonna predict who or where that comes from. Like I
You
am not.
wouldn't take from anyone outside of District 32?
I've never said that. No.
Okay.
I have taken money in donations from individuals outside the district that I've either been in industry with, or my family, or executives at oil and gas companies, because I've been in that industry for a long time. But I am not going to take money from an organization that fundamentally works against the platform and the issues that I'm fighting against.
Okay, and you talked about waste. How do you feel about LOFT?
Explain, what do you mean by law?
LOFT, the Legislative Office of Fiscal Transparency.
Sure.
That was created.
So, I mean, I think there needs to be some better transparency.
Okay.
Okay.
I just
Yes,
wanna
ma'am.
compliment your wife on not going on the Lincoln County, I believe it's the political page they now have. Your wife did not get on there and go crazy like your opponent's wife did. And I thought it was extremely rude for someone to get on there. I mean, I defend my husband.
You can tell her.
Well, I
Yeah,
defend my husband.
She's right here, just tell her.
Well, I didn't like it. And I think that
I don't
it
like
should've
being
kept-
called names. I mean,
I'm just saying, I respect his wife too.
Yeah, I mean,
But-
it is rude and disrespectful what, opponents' families have to go through.
I agree with
Yeah,
that,
it's bad, so.
that there's always.
And I do hope that your children and your wife do not have to go through
Gosh, no kidding.
some of what we have gone through, but
Why
I
you
respect
show up at
anyone who
meetings?
who puts their name on the ballot.
I don't wanna get into that side of it, because we could be here all night, but the
No.
amount that we've gone through the last 3 to 4 months has been pretty significant.
That's right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to compliment your wife.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank
So
you.
District 32 has and always will have a very large tribal presence, both tribal members as well as tribal governments.
Sure.
The climate today between state government and tribal government is very uneasy.
Yeah.
Just curious, with your background, more from an Oklahoma City perspective, coming out now more into a tribal perspective, how do you see yourself working with tribal leaders, tribal governments? What's your position on that from an economic standpoint?
Sure. And to be clear, it's been a little over 10 years since I lived in the city. But from a tribal relations perspective, I'm never gonna come to a table completely unwilling to compromise or do business with somebody, unless they're fundamentally opposed to my morals and my beliefs. So, being unwilling to have a conversation, have some open dialogue, on one side of the table, to me is not the right approach. And I've done business for many years and worked with people to come up with solutions and work together. And I would have the same level of respect for the tribes and for what they're doing, and find ways that we can absolutely work together. Because you're right, I mean, it's a huge presence out here, and it's not an us versus them by any stretch of the imagination. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, I've lived here all my life, and I've been around cows and tractors and all my life, but I feel like we're focusing so much on the ranchers and the farmers, and I think there's a lot of goodness in that for this county, but I feel like there's another direction that we need to grow, and that's with small businesses and bringing in new growth of entrepreneurs, engaging with SBA, trying to generate new growth in this county with people that might want to start businesses, and I see a lacking of that. I see it at the federal level, trying to get loans and grants or subsidies to try to maybe go out there and try to start a business. Unlike with the farmers, they have subsidies out the ear every year. Why is that? I'd like to see more of a balance.
Yeah.
Where there's a little bit of that pushed over our way, that, I might want to start a construction company. How can I get that kind of help?
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and we do have somewhat of a climate right now where it's very difficult to start your own business and to be, successful in that long term. A lot of small businesses don't have the ability to to do that. And so to the extent that we can find ways to partner with entrepreneurs and small business owners and give them some support, some temporary support to help them get going, then I'm certainly in favor of that. And I believe, you know, from a regulatory environment as well, I mean, just the tax climate that we have overall here in our state is not conducive to small business, and it needs to be. I mean, obviously I have had a lot of skin in that game for a long time, so I understand that. What else? Yes, sir.
How do you feel about eliminating eminent domain?
I think that is abused very often, and I don't think it's right. Whether we're talking about Turnpike Authority, whether we're talking about other eminent domain issues, whether we're talking about, you know, transmission lines and power companies and all of that, I think it's very wrong how that's been abused for government purpose. So I don't agree with it.
If you were elected, would you have an avenue to come against that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to talk with other legislators and senators that have either been working on things in the past or been pushing, you know, an effort and see what they're up to. But I absolutely am all ears about it.
You do realize if you do that, you're gonna disturb the good old boy network.
It needs to be disturbed.
I got a lot of friends, and I know people at the Capitol today. I'm certainly of the awareness that maybe some positions that I take are not extremely popular.
That's
and I'm
right.
totally fine with that.
Yeah, that's
All right
great.
with that.
I just wanna say that from the very first time that I came across you, I didn't know you were running for anything. I ran into you at a city council meeting where I was speaking about the wind turbines.
Yes, ma'am.
And, I just wanna commend that I have never seen you be anything but have ultimate respect for any person that agrees with you, opposes you, questions you.
Thank you, ma'am.
You have rolled up your sleeves and done more door knocking and asking more people personally. And I know that that's not a front. I've got to know you over this time, and I know that's not a front. I see your values in your family. You do live on a farm, you have a lot of animals and things like that, and I want to just say that I have not seen anything from you that would make me question you. I would take you as a next door neighbor any day of the week.
I appreciate that.
Because of the fact that it is hard to stand up.
Sure.
It's hard to stand up against, muscle. But it is very, very important that we do. I've never been political in my life. I've never gotten involved in anything. This affects me,
Yes, ma'am.
our farms, our livelihoods, and I've seen you fighting for the same things that I'm fighting for, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate, I know you've gone through a lot, and I know that's not the end of it, but I have the utmost respect for you as a man.
Thank you, ma'am, very much. No, I wear my emotions on my sleeve pretty well, but I also am hopefully have always been respectful to everybody that I've been in contact with. So, no, I appreciate that. Couple more minutes, a couple more questions probably, and then we'll probably reach our hour here. Yes, sir.
Question. Looking at your pamphlet here.
Yes, sir.
As you're coming to ask us for your vote.
Yes, sir.
Focusing on livelihoods and legacy. The past 10 years that Representative Maltz has been in office, the hundreds of millions of dollars that he's brought to District 32, the work that he's brought here because of the different projects and that surely has affected livelihoods.
Okay.
It certainly has laid a legacy. For you to enter this race now and to upseat Representative Bowles, should you be successful,
Right.
County now has a freshman in there.
Right.
Whereas for the next 2 years, here in about 5 months, there's gonna be a huge project just north of Perkins. Right now, that project's going on in Pryor. That's 7 years of work, which is gonna turn into more than that. Not to mention the jobs that will be employed there. Aside from your talking points here, why should my vote come to you, a freshman? And this is no disrespect at all.
No offense or disrespect at all. I
Because now
understand
I'm
what
coming
you're
from
saying.
as a blue collar worker.
Understood.
Again, how are you going to fill those shoes
Sure.
as a freshman to continue moving Licking County and District 32 forward?
Yeah. I think it would be unrealistic to try to say, and I'm not gonna speak for Wallace, but anybody that's been in that position or been at the legislature for 10 years, for somebody to come in and immediately hit the ground and do exactly what those people are capable of doing 10 years in. I think that's unrealistic. But I think also it's unfair, and I'm not saying that you're suggesting this. Other people have suggested that I'll be completely ineffective for the first 2 to 6 years, which I think is inaccurate as well. So I think there's still a significant amount of room for me to be effective and to create change and to represent this district. In terms of vote, I've always told people this is who I am, this is where I stand, and this is what I believe in and what I'm fighting for. If that aligns with you, great. And there could be 15 different issues on that sheet of paper, and we could align on 8 or 10 or however many, right? And that's great. But if we fundamentally don't see eye to eye on things, or we have materially different beliefs, I'm not gonna try to convince you to change your beliefs and what have you, right? So it's all about who I am. If you believe in what I'm pursuing and what I stand for, then I welcome the vote, but I respect the vote either way.
Well, and of course, like I said, I mean, being a blue collar worker,
Yes, sir.
work's important.
Yeah.
It's real important.
Yeah.
It's real important to stay as close to home as possible.
Yes,
And
sir.
I have to travel out of the state.
Yes, sir.
Because there was a lot of that going on 10, 15 years.
Yes, sir.
And like I said, that has come in at 32, has kept a lot of our families
Sure.
fed.
Yes, sir.
And like I said, again, not that I'm not gonna, I just, like I
Yeah.
said, when you're asking for us to have, basically hand the torch over
Right.
to a new representative of 32 from someone that has accomplished quite a bit, especially at the A and B chair. You know, and now we're asking, hey, let's vote our A B chair out.
Right.
One of the most powerful positions down there.
Right.
And let's hand it over to the freshman, I guess. Why now?
Why now?
Not 2 years after he turns out.
Because fundamentally, I believe people should vote for the representative that closely aligns with them. And on a number of issues, he and I are quite different. And so when I saw that we were quite a bit different, and then I felt led to enter this race, that was all the reasoning that I needed, because I didn't feel like I was going to get the representation that I wanted, that I desired, that closely aligned with my interests with him.
Right.
So that's fundamentally why I'm going in.
Can I ask one more question?
Did you reach out? Did you reach out to
Sorry,
him
let him
first?
finish real quick.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
What I read here, I know Representative Wallace has spoken on these things as well.
Sure.
Can you point some of those fundamental differences out? Because like I said, what I'm reading here and what I've read from the stuff that got from Representative Wallace, it's very similar. Because he's some of those differences.
Yeah.
This is my first time meeting him, so.
No, that's great. So when the primary was about to kick off, I had established my opinion and my position on green energy and industrial wind and solar. He said at a legislative breakfast at the time that he was neutral on the topic, that he was taking money from green energy companies. He's applied the tax credits for $180 million for the solar factory, the $10 million for the hydrogen that was proposed. So all of that fundamentally, which was the last straw for me to consider entering the race, he and I were very much fundamentally different and on other sides. Some of that messaging has changed in the runoff here, which is why you're saying that some of the material from him is similar in nature to my stance, right? So that, I would say, is the biggest contrast from the beginning of the race. Yeah, yes ma'am.
I just wanted to know if you reached out to, Representative Wallace prior to running to talk about some of those issues that you disagreed on.
No, I didn't, because the timeline didn't really provide a window for that. The industrial wind and solar becoming a major topic of discussion was late February, early March, and then through a lot of prayer and consideration in late March, that's when I ultimately made my decision to enter the race. So no, I did not take the opportunity to go and sit with him and talk with him, given the small window of time. Yes, sir.
Do you expect, should you be elected, to have a better voting record than 66%?
In terms of actually votes cast, or
Yes.
the nature of the vote?
Votes cast.
I mean, I show up, I'm not saying he didn't show up to work every day, but if my primary responsibility is to represent this district and vote in the nature of the majority of this district, then yes, I will be there every time. Yes, ma'am, and I think maybe you got one, or 1 minute. Okay, go ahead real quick and then I'll go to him.
I just wanted to say that he may not have gone to Mr. Wallace, but a lot of us did, and we were totally ignored. He was very rude, he was very condescending, he did not care about anything that we had. We aligned with you because of the fact that we did not feel, and none of my neighbors feel, that we have been represented, that we have been listened to, that we have extreme concerns.
Right.
And that's when I saw like you said, your values aligned with our values, where what is being said by the opponent is not what his actions. He has completely flip-flopped from what he was indicating and how he was treating everybody.
Okay,
So-
thank you. Yes, sir, Mr. Cardiff. And then I don't know, I think that'll probably be the last question. I don't know how long we have in the facility, but I'm happy to stick around and talk one-on-one. Okay, well, I know we were kind of scheduling this to be an hour, so maybe the last one with you, and then I'm certainly happy to do one-on-one, but what your question, sir?
So I've never met with or talked with Kevin Wallace.
Okay.
But what I noticed a lot of, especially from the federal level down, anytime you see anything about an election or, especially in the primaries, there's so much infighting. That's what really makes me upset with primaries and presidential debates at the primary level. They're all fighting amongst each other and saying, you suck, whatever.
Right.
It is what it is. I get it. You're trying to win. I know that Kevin Wallace he's sponsored and he's supported some bills that are really close to me. And I know that you've already stated that you are in complete favor of those as well.
That's right.
So y'all do align a lot, not on everything, obviously,
Right.
but on a lot of stuff. So obviously you want to win, yeah,
Right.
of course. But if for whatever reason Wallace was to get the nomination to go up against the Democrat,
There is no Democrat. by the way.
There is no
Yeah,
Democrat.
so it's over.
Hey.
Don't listen to me.
What's your name?
Yep.
Your new campaign manager.
Nick's out of the job.
Not much.
Absolutely going forward, if this doesn't go the direction that I believe it's going to go, then I would love to have more conversations with Representative Wallace on what he does to represent this district. So I'll be at the Capitol and scheduling meetings with him for sure.
That's basically what I was asking. Would
Yeah,
you
yeah,
support
and
him if he were to get it over you? And I would like to ask him the same question of, would you support Jim if he was to get it over you? And, cause we're all on the same team. I would like to think we all kind of want, for the most part, the same, idea
Result.
of the American dream. And person on the Republican Party and a lot less.
Yeah, that would be ideal for sure. Thank you guys again so much for the questions, and I appreciate every single person being here. It's been a blessing to be able to talk to you all, and thank you guys again for opening up the facility. Happy to stick around and hang out for a little bit. There's waters and sodas over there in the ice chest, so please take one for the road. There's plenty to go around. But I appreciate y'all very much, and y'all have a blessed night. Okay? Thank you.